Real estate investing isn't just buy and hold. There's so many different strategies. You can do student rental, you can do BRRRR, you can flips, you can wholesale, you can even do Airbnb Arbitrage. But here's the problem. Most people chose the wrong one because they have no idea what to choose in the very beginning. And this one mistake can literally cost you tens, maybe hundreds of thousands of dollars and create a lot of setback financially for you. So in this video, I'm going to be ranking the real estate strategies so you know what to choose and more importantly, based on your financial situation, what's best for you. And by the way, the very last strategy is something that nobody expects.
So what is your experience with student rental and co-living?
Student rental and co-living is actually by far the best one to create cash flow. And when we first started, we used student rentals, right? We started with a student rental. We find a property with 4 bedrooms, 5 bedrooms, and create additional room or 2, right? And this is how we can actually really get 4 or 5 tenants paying all the mortgage, taxes, maintenance, and all that stuff. The last 1 to 2 rooms will literally provide us with a pure profit at the end. I do really enjoy the student rental method because you get to control the tenant profile almost every year, every other years. So if you have any tenants that doesn't get along with everybody else or with you, then you get to have that flexibility to change the tenancy. But more importantly, you really diversify your risk quite a bit. You're not really relying on 1 or 2 sources of income. You're relying on 6, 7, 8 different sources of income. So that's what I like about that strategy.
How would you rank student rental from 1 to 10?
This I would say a 9. The only reason why it's not a 10 is because there's an operational problem that not a lot of people would like dealing with.
And how would you rate house hacking from 0 to 9?
House hacking, if your situation permits you to do that, 10 out of 10. Okay, and the reason why I say that is because it's such a necessary sacrifice to get into the housing market, especially for a lot of younger people, right? It only requires you 5% down. In the States, it would be 3.5% down. But basically, you get to live in the property with a highly leveraged mortgage. That's basically the benefits that the government provides you with so that you can actually get into the home ownership. But house hacking really means that you're getting into a property, home ownership, but then you're getting other people to share that burden of the financial responsibility.
Can you give me an example? I don't know what house hacking is.
So for example, you can be living in one apartment, right? So this might be a duplex setup, right? Main floor, basement, or side-by-side setup. You can live in one unit. The other part of a house, you can actually just get it rented. Or you can even do sort of a student rental setup, right? That's actually how we started. Basically, you get a student rental, you live in one of the rooms. The rest of the rooms you can rent to your roommates, housemates, or in some cases will be other students. So house hacking, I will give you a 10 because it's a necessary step for you to get into the home ownership in today's market. Very easy way, very doable.
In today's economy, do you think that flips are good ideas?
Flips, I would say at 5, especially in today's economy. And main reason is that it comes with a lot of skill set, experience, a lot of capital, and you have to do things very accurately in order for you to make some profit out of it. Most people, when they look at the TV show, they see the transformation, they think that it's very easy. It's actually not that easy, right? Because you need to buy right, you need to buy in the right location. You need to know who your end users are, aka your buyers. And more importantly, how do you actually manage the construction? And there's a lot of capital throughout this entire process before you can see the profit. So my personal opinion is that you only get into flips once you really understand the renovation side of things and you understand how to underwrite a deal, right? And that takes a lot of effort initially. So first one, I don't recommend anybody to get into flips unless you have a mentorship, someone who can actually guide you through. You want to get into a more affordable market, tier 2 city, where you're only flipping with maybe 100K, 150K type of housing instead of 600 or 800K.
So how about BRRRR Method?
BRRRR Method, I would rank it at 8. Typically, when the market is really strong, I would rank it at 10. But in today's market, it's still high, but I have to bring it down to 8.
Can you explain what BRRRR is? What does it stand for?
BRRRR Method stands for buy, renovate, rent, refi, and repeat. And this method works extremely well in a healthy market because when the interest rate is low and the market is appreciating, you can easily create a spread and then get a cash out refi. And then once you have the cash out refi with the equity out, you can still cash flow and you can reallocate the funds into the next cash flowing properties. So it works extremely well between 2018 all the way to 2022. But in today's market, you have to be very cautious about this strategy because everything that you take out is high interest loan payment. Okay, so you have to be allocating things very strategically. And that's why for a lot of people, I highly recommend you go into a BRRRR method in a tier 2 city again because it cash flows and you don't necessarily need to do a refi process immediately after you finish the renovation process. Wait until you have the next deal lined up. That's when you can potentially look into refinancing your previous project and then expand it this way. But do it slowly in today's market.
So I see on social media a lot of younger generation are talking about wholesaling because it doesn't require any capital. Can you expand a little bit more on that?
Yeah, wholesaling right now I will be ranking at maybe 6, slightly higher than flips. And the reason why I'm saying that is because it is a risk-free sort of a strategy. You don't need a lot of capital, but how it works is that you're buying a property, you're making a deal with a seller, and hopefully it's a delinquent sellers where they actually need to offload the property ASAP. So you get that property under contract for a very big spread. Once you get that done, instead of you closing on the property, you flip it over to another investors. And this investors will invest the capital and then basically continue with the project. So what you're doing is like middlemaning this entire thing. Get it under contract, bring it over to another investors and get paid for sometimes 5K, 10K, in some cases it will be 25K. Okay, it's very attractive idea because you don't need a lot of capital, risk is very low, and you can basically do this a few times to increase your cash reserve. The only problem with that, people made it sound too easy and too simple to do. It is a simple business model, right? You just need to connect with the two different dots. But my biggest concern is that a lot of people don't even know how to negotiate. They don't know how to underwrite process. They don't have the resource to find the right leads for both seller and buyers. So when they're getting into the industry, they think that it's just making the dots, making a couple calls, and then you can make 20K. Doesn't work like that. Okay, you have to become an investor first, learn how flippers are thinking about, learn how BRRRR method works, what the metrics that everybody else is looking for. Then you can become a successful wholesaler sourcing those deals for them.
Okay, the infamous Airbnb. Does it make money in today's market?
Airbnb still makes money into this market. Airbnb, I will give you an 8. The only thing that I want to say is that don't buy into an Airbnb arbitrage idea too much, right? Because a lot of people are thinking that you can just rent a place from a landlord and then you can literally start operating Airbnb operation right away and start being profitable. It only works when you understand the market really well. You understand that there's a rental demand or short-term rental demand. Okay, not even just rental demand. And it only works when you have a backup option. If you ever need to fall back into the long-term rental and the numbers still make sense, then this is an amazing strategy, okay? Because you have one asset that you can acquire. The number will work for a long-term renter, but you're just using Airbnb strategy to kind of boost up that cash flow. 2, 3, 4 different right Airbnb operation will literally get you out of your full-time job. I like Airbnb model. You just need to get a lot of education, and also the market, certain market is already saturated. So you need to be fully educated before you pull a trigger.
What's Airbnb arbitrage?
Airbnb arbitrage means that you're not actually owning the asset. Okay, so you're leasing out from another landlord or investors, and then as a long-term renter with the right to operate it as an Airbnb. So you can make money off the difference between the Airbnb revenue versus your rent, right? The problem with that is that you don't actually own the asset, right? So you're buying into an operation, which is not a bad idea, but at the same time, you gotta understand that there's an upfront payment for rent. First, last month's rent, maybe security deposit. You also need to put up furniture, decorations, and all that stuff. And then if there's any repairs that happens, you're not the landlords to make a decision on the repairs. You still need to coordinate with the landlords to do the repairs. There's a lot of moving parts in this business. It works extremely well when the short-term rental demand is extremely high, okay? But right now in today's market where everybody is kind of like tight with the economies and all that stuff, this model, sometimes if you overscale, sometimes you're gonna have the cash flow issue. And you won't actually make your money back for 2 years. Like that's one thing that most people don't understand.
There's another strategy that you talked about, rent to own. What does that mean?
Rent to own is a very common strategy when the market is a little bit flat. This is basically a strategy where you acquire properties and instead of you doing a long-term renter, you're finding a renter buyer. They're renting the properties with the intention that in the next 3 years, maybe 5 years, they're going to end up acquiring this property. So rent to own is a very unique and creative strategy where you can find the renter buyer for higher rent to create that cash flow, but you're locking up a future purchase price with the renter buyer. So it will be very good if that match is there. I personally don't like doing that. I will only rank it at maybe 3 out of 10. And the reason being 2 different reasons. One is real estate prices has been all-time high right now. A lot of renters, they may not necessarily able to actually do this. So renter buyer demand is all-time low at the current moment. Number 2 is that you're kind of locking up the future price in today's market. So you're projecting that future price is only going to be 3, maybe 5%. If it's too much, renter buyers is not going to want to buy. But if you only do 3 or 5% and when the market really picks up, that's where you end up leaving a lot of money on the table. Rent to own method works 10 years ago. Many investors made a lot of money back then using this strategy. So I don't think it's the right strategy for a lot of newer investors coming into the market.
Okay, and then sub 2, what does that mean?
Sub 2, my favorite person, Pace Morby. He talks about creative financing a lot, and I actually like how creative he is as a business owner. And a lot of people were able to actually use his method to acquire properties with no money down. Okay, now sub 2 is the form of you taking over other people's mortgage, existing mortgage, so that you're not qualifying for a traditional bank. You're taking over the seller's mortgage, and in exchange, you're providing the price point that sellers wanted. Okay, so sub 2 is a very creative way for you to own a property without a lot of capital, but there's a catch here. Number 1, you're overpaying for a property almost all the time. And number 2 is that when you overpay, you're really banking on the speculation. There's not going to be much of cash flow unless you do a co-living type of concept where you get a lot of renters in, or Airbnb. But the risk to me is a little bit too high. And if the primary goal is just to own a property, this is a great solution. But it's not the best way for you to generate cash flow or create a long-term wealth in the next 3 to 5 years. This has to be 10 to 15-year plan.
Why would people want to take over someone else's mortgage when they can just go buy their own?
Qualifying for mortgage is typically the hardest process in this whole acquisition process. You need to get the bank to look at your credits, approve you with a certain amount of loan. And more importantly, there's still a broker fee, inspections, and all that stuff. A lot of due diligence that the lenders need to do on you. With a sub-2 where you take over other people's mortgages, that you can skip all of that, right? Why do you want to get another loan to pay for the existing loan? You just take over it this way. The concept is really good. Execution side of things though, not always that easy as what we see on the internet. Okay, so sub-2, I would rank it a 7 because it's a very creative way for anybody to get into real estate and have that ownership without going through a tedious process.
But you need a lot of capital then.
You don't need a lot of capital, right? Sub-2 typically means that you overpay the property. You're targeting people who wanted to sell but couldn't get out. So they lock in their mortgage 3-4 years ago at the peak of the market and they just want to be done with it, right? So you're taking over their mortgage, which means they're in negative equity at this moment. So you're overpaying for that property, and then in the next 5 to 10 years, hopefully the market will continue to appreciate and then you can enjoy that difference in the appreciation. Not my favorite strategy. I will only use it if I had the opportunity to do it and still produce cash flow. But most of the investors who got into this idea is that they're trying to buy something with no money down. No money down typically means that there's a bit of trade-off here.
And another strategy that you mentioned is lending. What's lending?
Okay, becoming a private lender. So if you have some money set aside, it's always good to kind of lend it out. And lending typically will only get you about maybe 8 to 10% if you're a first mortgage position. If you're lending it to a flip project, shorter term, 6 months, 8 months, typically you can ask for 12 to 14%. Bridge loan for a couple months, you can probably even ask for 15 to 16%. The lending side of things is actually really good for people who are business owner, high paying job, don't have a lot of time to invest in real estate, but want to learn about real estate industry, because you do this is a guaranteed payment and you have the right to do a full due diligence on this project and this person. And for me, I actually like that. I would rank private lending at 8 out of 10. And the main reason is because you get compensated while you're learning this entire industry. You can see things from a very active side of things without actually getting yourself involved. For private lenders who keep doing this consistently, it's almost a get rich guarantee type of method, and I highly recommend it if you have some money set aside and you just don't have the time to operate any project.
How do I get it started with lending?
Getting started with lending, 2 different ways. You can maybe talk to a mortgage broker, right? Mortgage broker typically knows like who needs fundings, right? So you can connect with them. The other way is to get into a community where you know that this community is what you want to learn. Just connect with the members who are doing the exact same thing with a shared vision. So with our community, we have a lot of people end up collaborating. They feel a lot more comfortable because they are currently going through the same process, same learning method, and more importantly, is that every deal, everybody is being vetted in a community because they're learning essentially from the same coach. So if I were to recommend anybody, come into a community, learn about the method, vet the people, and all the deals essentially will also be vetted within the group.
What about commercial building, land development, and syndication for apartment building?
Okay, honestly, if you're a beginner investor, those are not right for you. It might sound very exciting, very attractive, and maybe you have a lot of capital to start it off with and you just don't want to get into residential. But the main thing about real estate is that this is a stepping stone to everything, right? So if you're going to be investing into something that requires you to put on 300K, 500K, the friction of making that commitment in big decision, it's going to take way too long, and most people end up losing momentum in this type of due diligence. So my recommendation is to get yourself into one small project, do private lending, do co-living, student rentals and all that stuff, something that's very easy to digest, right? And learn a little bit about wholesaling, because wholesaling is about finding the right people, finding the right deals on the market, off the market, right? And then you can slowly mix up these type of strategy. Once you have the experience with 2 or 3 projects, then you can get into a syndication, a more complicated strategy. For newer investors, there's really a couple different ways for you to get started ASAP. Number 1 is, if your situation permits you, do a house hacking / student rental or co-living, because this is the best way for you to get in with a very minimal cost. And then on top of that, you'll for sure cash flow and you'll allow you to learn everything. If you have a family already, do a private lending into a BRRRR method. That way you can see the entire thing, while getting paid. And I personally like that a lot, because once you learn that, then you can do a BRRRR method, and you can consider mixing the BRRRR method maybe with Airbnb to keep expanding your experience in this field. The goal here is never just pick one, is to figure out what's best in your current situation, and then pick a couple strategies that mix together to boost up your cash flow and your equity over time. And once you do this correctly, recycling of capital becomes much easier, and expansion of real estate will literally happen within a year. If you have been thinking about investing in real estate but been sitting on the sideline and you want to really know how to get into real estate market, give this video a watch.